Oh, hello, everyone. Story is live. I've got my dog here and some Subway. But let's see, just keeping it real as always. Oh, all right. And let's see. So who have we got tonight? Eventually, we've got KD coming. He is running a little bit late. And then we've got Jeff Wood and me. I'm Amy Armstrong. And then we've got Roseanna Frechette, who does all kinds of things in the Denver area, but Roseanna also runs a kind of like open mic, flash fiction focused kind of setup thing. It was normally based at the Mercury Cafe. I think currently they're doing it on Zoom, and I believe this guy Nicholas is actually running it now, so maybe I have that wrong, but I know she started it all and she's amazing. And let's see, and then after Roseanna, we've got Tom Broderick, who has also been on the show a whole bunch of times. And so good lineup tonight. I'm actually debating, because I don't want to keep sitting here talking at you for too long. This is one of those days where the first person on the roster is running behind and I don't have that much to talk about. But I guess that one thing I will mention is the Rocky Mountain Fiction Writers Colorado Gold Conference is coming up. That's in October, and they do have a virtual option. So if you're worried about COVID or anything, there is a virtual conference option for that. That's a bit less expensive as well. So definitely something to keep in mind. You can go to rmfw.org to get the details on that. And Jeff says he will go first if I want him to go first. So, all right. Jeff, are you okay with that?
Sure. I can easily go first.
0 p.m.
Story mom.
All right. So I will let you go ahead and go first, and I'll eat, and then we'll see you back in a few minutes.
Sounds good, Amy. Thanks, as always, for hosting us, Amy. I have got a weird story tonight, and even the title is weird. It's called Kids Grow Sea Monkeys in Your Very Own Home, and it's sort of a homage to a Ray Bradbury story called Boys Raise Giant Mushrooms in Your Cellar. So, kids grow sea monkeys in your very own home. A large cartoonish plastic bug bounced from a stiff spring mounted on top of the Bug-N-X van sitting in Mr. Stiller's driveway, nodding in the wind as if in approval of all that it saw. Mr. Stiller and the Bug-N-X man stood in Mr. Stiller's basement. The Bug-N-X man said, "My notes from your call said you had sea monkeys?" "Yes," said Mr. Stiller. "Sea monkeys?" "Yes. What does that even mean?" Mr. Stiller said, "It's what my daughter calls them. Our basement flooded." "Yeah, you said that on the phone. And then my daughter came down here and looked in one of the puddles and said, 'Daddy, Daddy, look, a sea monkey,' from the ads in comic books." "I have no idea what you're talking about, sir." "They're just brine shrimp, but they're advertised as sea monkeys?" The Bug-N-X man stared at him. "Never mind, it doesn't matter," mumbled Mr. Stiller. "And when did you first see them?" The Bug-N-X man seemed bored already. "I just told you, when the basement flooded. After that flash flood, it rained and rained, and the window wells filled up and started leaking water onto the carpet. Anyway, when I went there were several inches of water in the basement. I did my best to dry the place out, but there's still quite a few puddles. And that's when they showed up. The monkeys. The sea monkeys, yes." Bug-N-X man sighed. "Well, okay, let's go take a look then." He slid on waterproof shields over his shoes, pulled out a tablet to record what he saw. Everett Stiller led the pest control guy to the basement door. He leaned out, pulled the string that turned on the single naked light bulb hanging above the stairs. He led the pest control guy down. Concrete and cinder block rose up around them as they descended into the unfinished basement. Pools of water spread across the concrete floor. The house had been built half a century ago, and the floor was no longer even. The dips in elevation separated the water into individual pools. Everett stepped aside to let the pest control guy look. He peered down into the puddle. He rubbed his eyes, pulled out his flashlight, and kneeled to look again. "See them?" asked Everett. "I see them," he said after an uncomfortably long pause. "Silverfish?" "No, I looked them up on the internet." "You're right," said the pest control guy. He reached into the water and picked up one of the little creatures. "Be careful," warned Everett. The pest control man ignored him. He held the insect up to his eye. Everett cringed. "Shit!" cried the pest control man. He closed his eyes and shook his head vigorously. "What happened?" "I don't know. I think I dropped it." The man blinked several times and searched the concrete floor for what he had dropped. Everett saw the sea monkey for a fraction of a second, zipping around inside the iris of the pest control man's eye before scooting across the white of his eye and disappearing behind the skin. He thought about telling the man the sea monkey might be inside his eyeball, but he knew the man wouldn't believe him. None of the others had believed it. Months before, while making coffee one morning, Everett Stiller noticed tiny specks in the water coming from his kitchen tap. He was filling the carafe with water and saw several little white shapes in the stream of water from the faucet. He lifted the clear glass carafe to the light and looked at the shapes swimming inside. It was then he saw the resemblance to sea monkeys. Mr. Stiller was not unduly bothered, but he did dump the water down the drain and fill the carafe again. It took him 3 tries before he was able to fill the carafe with water that contained no white specks. After the coffee maker incident, Mr. Stiller decided to conduct an experiment. He plucked 3 of the larger sea monkeys from a small pool of water in the kitchen sink. He kept them in a jar filled with about an inch of water, making sure to cap it with a tight metal lid to ensure they wouldn't try to jump into his eyes. He took them upstairs to the kitchen. He took off the metal lid and replaced it with a small square of cellophane. He took the jar and put it inside the microwave oven. He set the oven for 30 seconds and hit start. He didn't bother to check when the timer rang. He could still see them moving around inside the jar. He reset the timer for a minute and hit start again. This time he couldn't see them moving, so he opened the oven door. The 3 small insect-like creatures sat at the bottom of the jar, motionless. Only when he reached for the jar did they jump from where they lay directly towards his reaching hand, wriggling against the glass. Mr. Stiller jerked his hand away and set the timer for 3 minutes. Motion inside the jar stopped about 45 seconds in. When the timer sounded, he pulled out the jar. The sea monkeys were unmoving. He reached for the jar, pulled it out of the oven. No motion. They lay at the bottom of the jar, inert. He peeled off the square of cellophane. Mistake. He never even saw the thing jump. He saw the tiny plop of splashing water, felt the impact against his eyeball, though no pain, oddly, and heard the sizzle as the creature, now heated to several hundred degrees, landed on the surface of his eyeball and burrowed deep inside. He checked his eye in the bathroom mirror. It appeared reddened and sore, but otherwise fine. He leaned in closely to examine his eyes. The things were so little. Tiny white specks, barely discernible from the whites of his eyes in color, zipped back and forth, able to move effortlessly between the structures inside his eye, pupil to iris to cornea. They reminded him of the floaters he'd seen sometime, vague, semi-transparent shapes floating across his field of vision. Optometrists had always told him that the floaters were dead cells floating across the lens of his eyes. He closed his eyes to see if the white specks formed floaters. The specks, however, were too fast to be studied, diving out of his field of vision as if hiding from them. They didn't need to hide from him. He knew they were there already. The Broderick man sprayed the basement with something called permethrin. He told Mr. Stiller it was particularly effective against aquatic pests. Mr. Stiller had already researched the topic on the internet and knew it to be true. However, he didn't think it would work on sea monkeys. They were tough little critters. The Broderick man pulled one of the pests in a small plastic vial and slid it into his pocket, for identification tests. Mr. Stiller paid the $189 fee, and the Bucket X man got in his van and left. Mr. Stiller never heard the results of the tests. Dead insects covered the basement floor the day after the Bucket X man came. None of the dead insects were sea monkeys. Mr. Stiller checked the puddles and saw the sea monkeys were alive and healthy. They'd grown larger or maybe now a third of an inch long. Their numbers had increased significantly. Mr. Stiller had spotted 10 or 15 in each puddle and was pretty sure many more hid in the cracks and corners he could never search. When Mr. Stiller went out to get the morning paper, the sprinkler had just finished the scheduled morning watering of the front lawn. Tiny sea monkeys, much smaller than the ones in the basement, swam in the stagnant water left on the driveway. He squished around barefoot in the newly watered lawn looking for more of them. He saw a few, but no other insect or animal life of any kind. No insects, no worms, no squirrels, no birds. Just bright green grass, the occasional dandelion, and all those tiny specks. He waved to a couple of his neighbors. They did not wave back. Peterson Air Force Base was 2 exits down from Mr. Stiller's home. He could see the giant American flag flying from the equally outsized flagpole at the entrance. About a year ago, the paper had published an article about the Air Force poisoning the water of the area by allowing a poisonous fire retardant to be used on runways. The fire retardant contained poisonous chemicals, PFCs, which had leached into the area's aquifer. After the contamination had gone public, Mr. Stiller got a letter in the mail from the city. City inspectors are going to be going door to door, taking water samples to determine the spread of the contaminants. Some residents would be asked to volunteer blood samples to see if any PFCs were present in their bloodstream. Weeks later, construction sites had been set up in several places along Main Street. According to the paper, the construction was due to the city installing filters directly into the water pipes to stop the contamination before it reached the homes of those in the community. The construction finished up a few months after it had begun. The rose-clothed signs and the T-doors all disappeared. Mr. Stiller noticed no change in his water. No one ever came to Mr. Stiller's door for water samples. No one ever came to Mr. Stiller's door for his blood. 40 years ago, Everett's parents gave him a sea monkey farm for Christmas one year. He'd been bugging them to get him one for months. The comic book ads showed a happy, healthy nuclear family: mom, dad, brother, and sisters. All 4 of the sea monkeys sported big smiles on their faces, crowns perched upon their heads, webbed feet and hands, and a thick webbed tail. They all looked so happy. In the background stood their home, an opulent castle, bright and strong. Everett's parents fought a lot, and his siblings generally ignored him when they weren't actively tormenting him. He longed for a family like this one in the sea monkey ad: the peace and the calm, the smiles, the crowns, the impregnable castle. As a child, following the instructions to the letter, he poured a packet of water purifier into the water of the sea monkey farm, then dutifully waited 24 hours. He next poured in the sea monkey eggs. Tiny white flecks appeared in the water. Everett remained patient, alert for movement. None of them hatched for several days. None of them moved. Everett was sure they were dead, but the instruction manual said to wait 5 days, so he waited. And sure enough, nearly a week later, the white specks began to swim around. Everett excitedly added sea monkey food. He reacted to light, Everett noticed. He turned off the lights in his room, clicked on the flashlight, and pointed towards the aquarium, and they'd all gather around the beam. They'd sometimes react to motion, too. Everett would walk past the tank, and they'd swim after him, dutifully following. They all died the same night. They'd lived for around 6 months. Edward never knew what happened to them. He woke up in the morning and looked in the tank, and the sea monkeys were all lying at the bottom of the tank, motionless. After a few days, he told his mom. She flushed the critters that afternoon, cleaned out the tank, and returned it to his room. Edward wondered, how many sea monkeys have been flushed into the sewer system in the last 70 years? Mr. Stiller bought his daughter a sea monkey farm soon after he found the sea monkeys living in his basement and showed them to her. He was happy she'd remembered the sea monkeys. He'd given her a sea monkey farm one Christmas long ago, back when he was married and lived a happy suburban sea monkey life, before the divorce, before the lawyers, before the settlement. He searched online and found a number of places that would ship a sea monkey farm to him, but Walmart showed them cheapest and delivered fastest. He only had visitation rights for her once a month per the divorce settlement. So after he bought the sea monkeys, he had to wait several weeks before giving them to her. Mr. Stiller bought 5 more sea monkey farms online, in addition to the one he bought for his daughter. He remembered how his neighbors had reacted to him refusing to return his wave. He thought a present might help. He opened all the sea monkey packages, set them all out on the floor of the basement. He took out the packets of water purifier, sea monkey eggs, and sea monkey food. He threw them all away. He used a turkey baster to transfer the sea monkeys in the puddles of his basement to the sea monkey farms. The sea monkeys had become larger and their numbers larger as well, so Mr. Stiller had an easy time capturing enough of them. He took care to assure the sea monkeys had enough water from the puddles transferred into their new homes. He repackaged all the sea monkey farms. He left them on the porches of the neighbors he knew had kids with a bow and a nice card. In the card, he explained who he was, what sea monkeys were, how he'd had them as a kid, and how they bought him hours of entertainment. He suggested they look in their own basements and yards for fresh sea monkeys to care for and nurture. He mailed his daughter's sea monkey farm to her in care of his ex-wife. Mr. Stiller had done his research. Most of the information came from the internet or his recollection of the sea monkeys from his childhood. Some of this information, however, he realized he simply knew. Sea monkeys are a kind of brine shrimp, genetically manipulated for size, health, and lifespan by a white supremacist named Harold von Braunhut in 1959. That's true, by the way. Dr. von Braunhut believed in the genetic superiority of the white race. He believed mankind could be improved through genetic manipulation and promoted many techniques for genetic purification, some of them quite controversial. Sea monkeys live in a state of cryptobiosis until they are revived, meaning when conditions become too dry or too cold, the creature will shut down all processes of metabolism and enter a state of suspended animation. They revive when conditions become tolerable again. They can live for decades in a state of suspended animation without significant harm. They've even been taken into space aboard the Space Shuttle Discovery, and they revive perfectly upon returning to Earth. Any sudden chemical or environmental shock can shake them out of their suspended state and bring them back to life. Sea monkeys coaxed into hibernation by the pressures of an underground aquifer could theoretically be awakened by a harsh chemical, a PFC, say, leaking into that aquifer. They can survive drought, fire, extreme cold, and lengthy exposure to insecticides and pesticides. They can survive the crushing pressure of the deep underwater or the cold vacuum of space. They can survive poison aquifers. They can survive water purification systems. They are very nearly indestructible. The sea monkeys on the cover of the box the sea monkey farm came in had potbellies and webbed feet and hands. They had crowns and tails. Mr. Stiller knew real sea monkeys didn't actually look like that. He knew real sea monkeys actually resembled the alien in the movie of the same name. The aliens were facehuggers who attached themselves to their human hosts with multiple sets of hard, curved, taloned limbs. Once attached, they deposited their eggs inside. The sea monkeys had similar sets of curved, taloned limbs attached to a central backbone that narrowed into a webbed tail at one end. A pair of protruding eyes appeared from the other end. Hundreds of millions of sea monkey kits have been sold since 1957. Every sea monkey sold died eventually. They were all flushed down the toilet or poured down the drain. Whatever happened to all those sea monkeys? Mr. Stiller saw three of his neighbors out watering the lawn after the Bug Annex guy came. They all stayed out in the middle of their lawns much longer than Mr. Stiller would have thought was needed, watering their lawns with their garden hoses in the middle of the day. All 3 houses Mr. Stiller knew had sprinkler systems. Mrs. Clove across the street stayed watering her lawn even after the sprinklers came on, soaking her shoes and legs. Water pooled on the driveways and sidewalks. It formed puddles in the lower elevations of the grass. Mr. Stiller swore even from a distance he could see the tiny creatures swimming in the pools of water. His neighbors all smiled and waved at him this time. Happy families tending the lawns of their bright, sturdy homes. Maybe it was the gift of sea monkeys he left on their porches that changed their attitude. Over the weekend, the local paper announced the survey of the area's water system had been completed. After exhaustive tests of the water in the individual homes surrounding Peterson Air Force Base and blood tests of all the residents of those homes, the government agencies involved concluded that the water filters the city had installed at great cost inside the sewer system of the area had done their job. The level of contaminants in the water had fallen below the level considered dangerous. No one ever came to Mr. Stiller's door to test samples of his blood or his water. Too bad. He'd have been happy to supply them with as many samples as they wanted. Mr. Stiller's ex-wife, her new husband, and daughter all came to visit 6 weeks after that first sea monkey had been spotted in his basement. It was Mr. Stiller's turn to take his daughter for the weekend. Usually, they dropped her off at the curb and watched gloweringly from the car as Mr. Stiller opened his door and ushered her inside. This weekend, they stood on his porch in their Sunday best, the three of them holding hands, looking like the perfect nuclear family. Smiling, happy, confident, the shiny new homes across the street served as a backdrop. They looked so much like the sea monkey family on the package that Mr. Stiller thought they looked right at home with crowns on their head, webbed tails wagging happily behind them, castles towering majestically overhead. Mr. Stiller's daughter held out a gift for him in her hand. It was a sea monkey farm, of course. The family had grown so fond of the little pets Mr. Stiller had given them, they felt they should share in the joy of sea monkey ownership, too. The white specks inside their eyes danced joyously as he handed the gift over to her father. They all seemed so happy. The large American flag hanging from the pole outside Peterson Air Force Base flapped briskly in the breeze over the neighborhood. The Broderick truck drove by, observing the speed limit, the large plastic bug on top of the truck nodding approvingly with each bump in the road, the Broderick man smiling witlessly from the driver's side window, waving as he passed. The next-door neighbors watched, returning the waves, smiling their consent, the arcs of water from their hoses, soaking their lawns and gardens, trickling down their driveways and sidewalks into the gutters of the street, flowing into storm drains and sewers, advancing like the first few scouts of a vast, conquering army. And that's it. Thanks for listening.
Awesome, Jeff. Now I'm totally creeped out, though.
Well, good.
This might be worse than, the thing about, like, are there alligators in the sewers of Los Angeles? Like, I remember that was, the thing that we worried about when I was growing up in LA, because makes so much sense, right? But
well, like albino alligators in the New York City sewer system is what I remember.
Yeah, so I guess it's like either coast, that's where, that's what they're gonna think of. So, yeah.
Glad to creep you out.
All right. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Then, okay, so now we've got Katie. Hello, Katie. Oh, I can't hear you. See, seem to be having some sound issues. Oh, and I still can't hear you. Still can't hear you. I heard like a thump, but I didn't.
Testing.
Oh, now I think I can hear you now.
Okay.
Yay!
Okay. Hello.
Sorry. Hello, how are you?
It's been so long since I did a stories live that I'm kind of out of the habit.
It's okay, I mean, it happens. I don't know. It's with the way life is right now, every day just feels like a redo for me. So, or I just,
Believe
so,
me, I understand.
all righty. Well, so what do you have for us tonight, Katie?
So, I got a unique take on the Wendigo story. Yeah, I wrote a Wendigo story last year, and this is going to be my version of revisiting it.
Okay.
It's one of those better that I tell the story than tell about the story.
Fair. All right. I will let you take it away.
All righty. Okay, so there are times when, as a writer, you immerse yourself into your project. The the equivalent of method acting. You want to give your characters individuality. You want to give them a voice of their own. You want to get the feel of your characters. You want to give the backstory. So you do the research, you slip and slide out of one rabbit hole and down into the next. And it's all to lead up to that how did we get here point. The same is like what inspires us to write within our own respective genre. Inspire as in, well, what is the source of our inspiration? It can come from anything, anyone, any source. It's collectively referred to as our muse. And I want to say this is true of all writers and of all genres, but in this case, I'll only speak for myself. I write in multiple genres, but in this situation, the focus is going to be on horror. Now, when I'm inspired to write, I affectionately say my muse is whispering sweet nothings in my ear again, upon which I reach for my Pilot G2 pen and I start scribbling in my notebook. Okay, so why am I starting my stories live reading with this? Well, it's for context to kind of sort of help with the how did we get here point of my story. My muse. I've learned to listen to her when she speaks. As a horror writer, she's taken me to some pretty dark places, some much darker than others. My Wendigo story I wrote last year was a prime example. Prior to writing the story, I knew very little about the creature. By the time I'd done the research, separated fact from fiction, learned the difference between the Wendigo legend and the Wendigo psychosis, I felt I knew more than I ever wanted to know about the beast. A creature who was once a man who gave in to a gnawing hunger and consumed human flesh. It's said that when an animal eats a human, it loses its taste for any other food source. Now, there's a word for people that eat other humans: cannibals. But when the hunger grows, when the desire for any other food source is lost, when all that is left is the taste for human flesh, then sets in the Wendigo psychosis. But let's get deeper. What happens when the body changes? What happens when the body adapts for living in a harsh outside environment, away from mainstream civilization? Evolves to sustain itself between feedings, when it's driven by hunger, living only for the next kill? What happens when the body is equipped to be the perfect predator? Again, how did we get here? My first Wendigo story had taken place in the woods of a small and sleepy Canadian town. The woods were both home and prison to the creature. It was the town's well-known and best-kept secret. Now, as a horror writer, my own projects have never bothered me with setting pen to paper. It's what I do. That is, not until I wrote the story of the Wendigo. Probably because I wrote it with such realism, because I blended fact with fiction. The thing is, I swore that once I was done with my first Wendigo story, I'd never go back. But it would appear I'm being denied a choice. My muse wants me back in those Canadian woods to once more face off with the creature that never dies and forever hungers. And as all writers know, what the muse wants. I hear her whisper the opening line. She's setting the scene. She wants me to pick up my Pilot G2 pen. I know she's waiting. My muse, that is. I know what she wants. I close my eyes and give a sigh of exasperation. Yeah, I'm hesitating. Because I know the creature is also waiting, and I've already seen what he wants. Then, with a swipe of the pen, a few words written on paper, I'm back again. I'm back in those Canadian woods, next to that small and sleepy town. I never wanted to come back to these woods, but here I am. It was still unusually dark here, even with the fading sunlight. I take a walk down a semi-worn trail and attempt to get my bearings again. The more I walk, the dimmer the sunlight. The farther into the woods I got, the less clear the path. Trees were getting closer together. Grass became higher. I could barely make out the tamarack and the birch. I could smell the jack pines, though, a reminder that I was definitely in Canada once more. With the sun setting, the shadows stretched longer, and the branches looked like long, gnarled fingers. The smell of jack pines was there, sure enough, but there was something else. Something that was faint but noticeable. They say nothing associates a memory more than a sense of smell. And what was wafting along the winds, it brought to mind an image I'd rather forget. I wrote the Wendigo as freakishly tall, like a basketball player, but it was gaunt, like his skin was stretched too tight across his body. The boniness made the limbs look abnormally long, like it had been stretched on one of those Dark Ages torture racks. His skin was gray, like an ashy gray, like volcanic ash mixed with dirty flour. His bald head looked a little too big for his neck, but when it opens his mouth, its jaws went slack like a snake to make it open wider and show the savage nature of its razor-sharp teeth. I made his eyes a hazel gray. And because the skin on his head was stretched back and tight, it made his eyes look bigger than what they actually were. Thing is, though, I put something in those eyes, something that made them look both hurt and hateful at the same time. I'm trying to shake the thought from my mental and just continue walking. I never wanted to write about the creature again. Last time I was here, I barely escaped. Rather, my body did, but my mind's eye still sees what the creature did to one of my characters named Madison. The crunch of bones, the sucking sounds. The creature had grabbed an unconscious Madison by her leg. He peeled off her pants like the strips of a banana skin. Its jaws went slack like a snake, and it exposed row after row of shark-like teeth. Just then, Madison opened her eyes. The Wendigo allowed one final scream before it bit deep. Once again, I tried to ignore the first story and continue walking. It's completely dark now. I'm seeing only by moonlight. That scent I smelled earlier is stronger now. That of rotten flesh, molded meat. I hate it here. This darkness reeks of despair. This force is cursed. Still, I keep writing. I keep preparing for the inevitable. Her name is Laura Argyle. She and her husband Joe thought an overnight camping trip would rekindle their marriage. Both were lovers of the outdoors. Perhaps a bit of time around the campfire will put the spark back into the romance. It was only supposed to be for one night, but tonight makes 3. Laura hadn't seen Joe since this morning. Right now, all she wants is just to find her husband and get the hell out of here. As soon as Laura sees me, her mind goes where it shouldn't. A rescue party! Oh, thank God! I was so lost. My Joe, I can't find him. And I think there's something in here with us, something of some sort. I look at her with sadness. How do I tell her she'll never see Joe again? How do I tell her I'm the one that wrote her here? And you know the way out of here? Apparently, Mrs. Argyle had been rambling on hysterically while I've been wrestling with my own inner demons. Yes, ma'am, I do. Laura doesn't see what's coming from behind. She thanks God once more, but then she notices my expression. My head lowers for what's next. What? Well, can you get us out or not? I can't look her in the eyes, but she deserves to know. Can I? Yes, I can. Will I? I'm so sorry. I look away as the Wendigo grabs a fistful of Laura's hair. Laura screams as the horror that had been stalking her in these woods makes itself known. In her final seconds of life, she curses me. She curses God. I want to curse my muse for making me write this. The creature gives a quick twist of his victim's neck and chomps down on her throat. He consumes Laura Argyle in quick, ravenous fashion. The Wendigo, every bit as horrifying as I wrote him the first time. He then turns to me. He gives me a look with those bestial eyes, a look of familiarity, as if he's trying to remember something. The hunger, never ending, ever burning. I'd forgotten I wrote him with the ability to speak. It's just him and I now in these woods, man and monster. I pray for a moment of peace, a measure of grace. I know it won't last. My muse is whispering again. Someone is behind me. And the thing is, I know who it is without even looking. How do I get out of here? What the hell? My God, what kind of creature is that? No, I say to myself, of all people, why does it have to be her? I turn just in time to see her run. Even from behind, even from a distance, she's so beautiful. The Wendigo takes off after her. As he passes by me, we exchange a glance. There's a wicked gleam in his eye. He knows he'll catch her before she escapes these woods. You escaped, he says to me. But she won't. My muse is silent. I draw a line through her name on the page, but it's too late. She's now canon. She's now a part of the story. The creature's eyes, that gleam. I wonder, does he know who she is? Does he know what she means to me? Still, my muse is silent, so I take it as a sign. because I never write unless my muse is speaking to me. I put my Pilot G2 down. No more writing for now. The pen rose to her name on the page. I push my chair back and step away from the story. Yeah, I'll return to it one day, and probably one day soon. And when I do, the name on the page dies. She'll be eaten by a creature of my own creation. And I know it shouldn't bother me, but it does. I need air. I need to let the leash out a bit. The gym I go to is just a few miles away. Maybe a quick workout to do me some good before I read for Stories Live tonight. The end.
All right. Thank you, Katie, for, really putting us there with the Wendigo. I'm pretty sure, I put this in my comments, I am pretty sure that the Wendigo probably started out as a man who was going on a diet, because I just want to eat everything right now because I'm trying to get rid of the pandemic weight. But, it's,
I understand.
yeah, it's just after a while, everything, totally, you never really thought about it before, but then you're walking down the street and you're just going, I could eat that. I could eat that.
The moment you see it, you just instantly smell it. Just seeing a picture, you smell it. Yep.
Yeah. All the food. So
yeah.
I don't think I want to eat people, though. I haven't gotten quite that into it yet.
There is a line somewhere.
Yeah. I guess it depends on the people. I mean, Johnny Depp looks pretty tasty. I might eat him. But, other than that.
I guess with the right seasoning, a little pepper, a little paprika, who knows?
True. Yeah, I don't know. And I haven't tried it. So maybe I shouldn't knock it until I've tried it. I don't know. But I just hope it doesn't get that desperate. Anyway, yeah, talking about eating people, that's fabulous. So, but anyway, thank you so much, Katie. And sorry about the audio hiccup, but I'm glad we got that worked out. So, yay!
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Steve Anderson mentions here the long pork, the long pig, as some people call it. Yeah. So, if you're eating right now and you're watching this, I apologize, but I mean, I did say it was going to be horror stories, so it kind of it goes with the territory, but I am sorry. Anyway, moving right along. So I'm the next one here on the program because, my show, right? I should read something once in a while. So this particular thing is a work in progress. Most of the stuff that I have is a work in progress because I let life get in the way. And, I know that's wrong, but yeah, don't write like I do. Bad habits. But anyway, I was on Facebook where I spend way too much of my time. And actually, this was Jeffy Kennedy, who said that she overheard a mother say to her daughter, a daughter say to her mother in a store, "Mom, that dress is so 2012. And I was trying to figure out what the heck that even meant. And then I was like, God, but this just sounds too real. I've got to use this in something because I'm like, that's totally my jam, with moms and daughters saying bitchy things to each other. I mean, I've been practicing for years for this, decades, So anyway, I was thinking, well, what about a haunted dress? So, yes, this is what I came up with for that. And, like I said, it's not done. So, what we got here is what we got. And my working title for this is The Dress. Katie's Dress Shop was a staple of downtown Hadleyburg, Missouri, and had been for as long as anyone could remember. Not that downtown meant much in Hadleyburg. It was about 2 blocks square, with a rotation of owners trying and failing to resuscitate the cafe, a general store attached to the gas station, a bar, and a handful of clothes stores. Nobody remembered who the original Katie was, and the significance of Hadley didn't warrant mention in classrooms. For a small town, the residents opted for a surprising amount of anonymity. People suspected things, but rarely bothered to confirm. It took too much energy to care. The majority of the population was more focused on what they could be elsewhere if only given the chance. A few high school graduates made it out every year. Some of them returned after blowing all their money in St. Louis or Kansas City. Others just never made it back, and nobody really knew what happened to them. At least that's what people said at church and the bar. Follow-up questions weren't part of the conversation in Hadleyburg. Joyce Clay took her daughter to Katie's dress shop on an unseasonably warm September Saturday. They only needed light coats. The new shop owner glanced up from her book long enough to see the artificial distance between a mother and a teenage daughter, where mom was more excited about the shopping trip than the daughter. Frances waved at them in an awkward greeting gesture. She sighed and returned to her reading, determined to return to city life where she could enjoy social awkwardness with less consequence than the small-town Midwest. "How about this, Val?" Joyce pushed a black sheath dress toward her daughter. Val barely glanced at the dress and grimaced. Without even looking again, she said, "Oh, Mom, that is so 2012. "What?" "The cutouts and scuba fabric. No, just no." Her mom shook her head and swiveled the dress toward her again. "I didn't know you were so on top of fashion at age 7. "I don't even want a dress." "Val, we talked about this already." "That's never stopped you before." Frances caught the pleading look in Joyce's eyes and gathered the last of her retail strength for the day to take on the teen. "Hey, Val, are you sure you don't want to try that dress on? It might surprise you." "With what? Embalming fluid?" "Okay, young lady, I need a minute." Joyce mouthed sorry to Frances on her way out the door. Val rolled her eyes and stared at the floor while she chewed on her pinky nail. "The sooner you pick something, the sooner she'll get off your back, you know," Frances said. "Whatever. Today it's the dress. Tomorrow it'll be something else." "Well, that may be, but lady to lady, nobody regrets getting a little black dress." Val looked back at the dress on the rack. Frances approached Val the way most people would approach a dog with bared teeth, and gently pulled the hem out and stretched the fabric between her fingers. "I mean, you're right. It is that scuba stuff, but it's actually flattering and comfortable, and these cutouts would enhance your waist." "What is with those anyway? It's like some rabid razor-toothed moth went to town on it." "Okay, that's a little dark, and I'm not going to think about that too hard, Val, but let me put it this way. It will give you a nice shape, and I probably wouldn't say this to Mom, but it's pretty sexy when you show a little bit of skin. It makes guys think they're getting away with something because they think they're seeing something they shouldn't see." Val touched the fabric with the tip of a finger. With chipped metallic polish on it. She smiled slightly, then drew her hand back as if something bit her. "This is so stupid. I don't even have shoes to go with this." "I can find you shoes." Val met Frances's eyes. "How do you feel about sparkly high-heeled booties?" "Oh my God. Mom would hate those." "Yeah. Want to see them?" "Hell yes." Frances wrapped the dress in tissue paper and placed it gently on top of the shoebox. Then she handed it over the counter to Val. "So are you going to have a good time?" "Too far, Fran," Val said. "That's fair. You ladies have a good night." Frances waved to them as they left. Even though Val had annoyed her, she smiled to herself in satisfaction. With those boots and that dress, she suspected Val would have fun in spite of herself. Val took her packages up to her room as soon as they got home.
She wanted to try everything on in her own room in front of her full-length Walmart mirror just to prove to her mom what a clusterfuck this whole idea was. She tore open the tissue wrapping and pulled the dress over her bra and skinny jeans. It wasn't even worth it to fully undress for this. She shoved the booties on and zipped them up so hard she pinched her pinky in the process. Jesus fuck. She looked down at her pinky and saw blood pooling near her ragged cuticle. She sucked on it to try to stop it, but it was too deep. She groaned and stomped into her bathroom to search for a Band-Aid. As she rifled through her tiny medicine cabinet, she knocked several packages onto the floor and felt exhausted thinking about having to pick any of it up later. It just seemed pointless. Knock things down, pick them up, get dressed, go somewhere and pretend to have shit together, come home, fall apart, lather, rinse, and repeat. With her finger bandaged, she stepped in front of the mirror and finally allowed herself to look. She had to remind herself to breathe. It was as if the dress was made just for her, and for the first time, she wondered if she might actually feel seen and want to be seen. Maybe she didn't want the background of her Midwest attic lair, but for the moment, everything in the mirror looked perfect. She caught herself thinking about using the dress plus jeans and using it as a day look. In this, maybe she could get away with it. Valerie, her English teacher's voice cut through Val's daydream like a buzzsaw. She'd heard her use that tone with other students, but never with her. Val was one of the few students who would have happily attended school without social activities rather than the other way around. Val's eyes flew to the ceiling when she heard Ian Battelle chuckle in the seat behind her. Then he murmured, "Wake up, space case." "Fuck off, Ian." "Hey, enough." Their English teacher, Ms. Trudeau, straightened her latest 80s punk band t-shirt and tried to assume a more authoritative stance. This was the last place she wanted to be, single in her mid-30s in the middle of nowhere with an MFA, a few random publications, and surrounded by people who didn't care about anything longer than a TikTok post. Of course, Val was the only student she had who had talent at writing, and now she had to snap at her. "Ian, out." "What? What'd I do?" "You know what you did. Out." Val watched as Ian slipped out past Miss Trudeau, flipping her off in the process. Ms. Trudeau tented her fingers and touched them to the tip of her nose. To Val, this seemed like something she did when she had to be silently praying for aliens to abduct her and take her away from all of this. Okay, so back to Edgar Allan Poe. Valerie, in The Telltale Heart, how does the narrator try to convince us as readers that he is not mad? Lots of things, but none of them really make him sound sane. Can you be more specific? He knew to hide the body. The bell rang and Ms. Trudeau flinched. Val and her classmates closed notebooks and shoved them into their backpacks. Ian opened the door and let it bang again against the outside wall as he returned to collect his own pack for the next period. Even though it gave her an icky feeling in her gut, Val noticed how tall Ian had grown and that his gray eyes gave him a wild and mysterious look. How could someone so repulsive be attractive? He caught her staring and half smiled. Val looked away and bolted out the door. As she entered the hallway, she saw the one couple that had been together almost since birth, making out.
But it was there, and she had given up trying to change that. Last time she'd had that rich, velvety auburn and the vintage reddish brown one more, and who knew? Maybe the day would come. It would run so deeply with overlaid color that the new red would, in fact, become forever disparate.
Hey, Roseanna, are you able to see me?
So I should tell everyone while I've got you online and
See. I'm just
Flash
gonna go.
fiction readings are happening on the third Tuesday of every month. It's called Flash Fiction. We are up on our go. So we welcome all of them. No, I can see or hear you.
Oh, okay. Cool. All right. Okay, so next up we have Tom. Sorry, we had a little bit of glitch. My Wi-Fi is also being a little bit weird. So those of us who, or the rest of you who have cable internet, I'm sure you know about the joy that that can bring. But anyway, hi Tom.
Hi. Hello. Hopefully
How
my internet remains nice and cool.
All right. So what have you got for us tonight?
I have a story that is called The Carveco Kid. And so I used the name Carveco to parody the name of a popular company called Cutco that you might know. But Carveco actually is a company also that does a different thing. I just haven't changed it yet because I only found that out before this.
Well, that's okay. You know, I mean, it works for now. So,
Yes.
And hopefully the Carveco people, you know, angry Carveco gnomes won't come for you.
Yeah, them searching the internet for any mention of Carveco.
Yeah, and just be like, you've used our name. Why? All right. Well, I will let you go forth and read.
Thank you very much. All right. One morning, a week after moving into their new home, George and Angela Gallo were preparing for a city inspector when there was a knock on the door. George went and opened it, revealing a smiling young man of not more than 20 years, dressed in a suit slightly too big for him. His hair had been mercilessly gelled to form a sharp part on the side of his head, which somewhat distracted from the fact his narrow nose meant his eyes were too close together. One of his arms clutched a suitcase to his side while the other offered a handshake. "Good morning, sir. Do you mind if I steal a few moments of your time?" His voice was oddly elastic, the type of voice that changes pitch largely and without warning. George said, shaking the hand instinctively. "We're waiting for an inspector." "I'll make it quick," he said, and brushed past George into the living room, where Angela was tidying pillows on the sofa. "Beautiful home, ma'am," said the young man as he shook her hand. "When did y'all move in?" Angela was slightly dazed. "Just a week ago." "Welcome to the neighborhood. What prompted the move?" Angela looked at George. His face was emotionless. "Ease our minds a bit," George answered. "The city can be a little suffocating." "I hear that," their guest replied. Said Angela, "can I get you something to drink?" "Scotia water would be grand," he said. "A skosh?" Angela asked. "Just a wee bit," he replied, measuring a few inches with his thumb and forefinger. Angela returned with the glass of water as the guest sat down and displayed a family of pamphlets from his briefcase out on the coffee table, like a magician would playing cards. "Grazie," the young man said, receiving the water. George sat in an armchair perpendicular to the sofa, Angela in a chair nearby. The young man introduced himself as the grandson of their neighbor to the right. He listened intently as George and Angela then introduced themselves. And then he straightened his tie and turned to Angela. "May I ask what you do for a living, ma'am?" "I'm a teacher," she replied. "Beautiful profession. Best there is in my book." He turned to George and asked the same question. George lifted a leg and set it on the other, but otherwise remained silent. "George is between jobs at the moment," Angela said. "Well, I dare say it must be fate what brought me by your lovely home this morning, because, boy oh boy, have I got an opportunity for you." Angela leaned forward in her chair. "Can we help you with something?" "Oh no, Mrs. Gallo, it's you I'd like to help. I'd like to share with you today an unbelievable offer. Looks like it'd be perfect for your fella here." He slid one of the pamphlets across the coffee table. It was a glossy commercial pamphlet with a picture of a fine white marble kitchen, a jet black knife block filled with a dozen knives of various sizes featured prominently on the cover. on the counter. On top of the image in white letters were the words elegance, dependability, utility. Then below that, the name of the company. George read the name aloud. Carveco. The young man was there to sell them knives as part of one of those pyramid scheme companies. He gave the normal spiel to the couple, who politely listened, looked at the glossy photos of different knives, and graciously passed on buying anything. The young man then shifted his aim. If they bought a set of the knives, George could join this team at Carveco as an independent salesman. That's right, Carveco came up with an ingenious system whereby independent folks assemble the best and brightest of their inner circle to establish a sort of funnel web of contacts. I support you, you support me, you sign on a couple of your friends or associates to support you, and Bob's your uncle, you've got yourself a bona fide sure investment. But this too was met with level-headed resistance. Angela shrugged, standing, which made the men stand too. The Carveco Kid protested some more, but the couple was successfully able to gather his pamphlets into his briefcase and show him to the door. Just before passing through it, the salesman stopped and put a hand on the door frame. He leaned in close to George, not more than 6 inches from his face, and whispered, "It's in your best interest to consider my offer." "Oh?" George said. "You city folk don't know what might happen out here. All kinds of wild creatures roam these parts. There's knives. They'll keep you safe." George could smell the spearmint-laced stale coffee breath of his guest. Safe? From what? The young man paused again and then whispered, "Tarantulas." "Tarantulas?" The young man leaned back. "I left something for you," he said as he stepped out onto the porch, waving. "Give me a call, you change your mind." "What did he say?" Angela asked after George closed the door. "That he left something for us." "Well, probably this," she said, pointing out a pamphlet he'd left on the coffee table. The next morning was Monday, and Angela went off to work, leaving George to peruse the job listings, sip Folger, and contemplate the minutiae of suburbia outside the front window, grinding like hands in a giant clock. Dogs led their owners by leash from one side of the window to the other. Cars entered, slowed, parked, drove away again. Gardeners ran machines that to George sounded monstrous and more annoying than any machine in the city had ever been. One quirk of their new home was the mailbox, which had been painted inside and out with matte black paint by the previous owner. George didn't much care one way or the other until that Monday afternoon when he moseyed out to the mailbox, opened it, and reached in for the day's correspondence. For a split second, his fingers grazed what felt like the fuzz of a tennis ball. As he wondered what it might be, the fuzz flittered, causing him to jerk his hand out and stumble backward onto the street. From the box opening appeared a tarantula the size of his fist. He gaped as it plopped down from the mailbox onto the sidewalk. It was a burnt auburn color with bulbous fangs and segmented legs that resembled empty shrimp tails. Before he could recover from the shock, it skittered across their lawn and out of sight under the rose bushes that separated their property from the neighbors. George remained seated, hyperventilating, as the houses and garages and cars all around him reflected a friendly morning sun into a clear blue sky. Birds chirped, a trash can lid was closed somewhere. There was no one on the street. It took an hour sitting at his kitchen table before George's hands stopped shaking. A tarantula. What are the odds? Just like that Carveco Kid had said. George tried to set his mind back to whatever he was supposed to be doing that day, but no matter what, that feeling of the fine hairs the tarantula's legs and body would not leave his fingertips. Concentrating on anything useful was a lost cause. He sent a text to Angela about what had happened, but she seemed not to understand. "You're not hurt, are you?" her text read. "No, just shaken up." "Well, that's good." And then nothing else, as if he'd reported he'd simply stubbed his toe. George waited until dinner that evening, after they had exchanged pleasantries about their day, to bring the experience back up. "Isn't it crazy, that tarantula thing earlier?" His wife concurred. "That'd scare the hell out of me." "But, I mean, it was weird, right?" Weird? She watched his eyes fixate on the butter knife on the table. Yeah, that a tarantula shows up in our mailbox, with the mailbox lid closed, right after that Carveco Kid mentions them. It's an interesting coincidence, Angela demurred, sipping at her wine. But, Angela, George said quietly, what if it wasn't a coincidence? She reached across the table and laid her hand on his. George, honey, let's not, let this turn into something again, okay? We have a new start here. He moved his eyes up to meet hers. She smiled, rubbing the hand. Yeah, I know. That night, lying wide awake in bed while Angela slept soundly next to him, George couldn't help thinking of tarantulas and the funnel-like webs they used to line their burrows. He imagined himself trapped in a web made of glistening silver knives of all sorts, from the cutlery types to the killing types. The image, the feeling, would not leave his mind. But eventually, somewhere amid the autumn breeze and the distant dogs barking that blew in from the open window, he managed to drift off to sleep. George spent the better part of the morning fashioning a contraption for opening the mailbox from a distance, out of a heavy-duty flashlight and an unwound coat hanger, but he couldn't muster the courage to try it. Instead, in the afternoon, on his way to the grocery store, George was intercepted on the sidewalk by the Carveco Kid, who had come out of his grandmother's house at the same time as George had come out of his house. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. George Gallo! George froze as the Carveco Kid, clad in the same suit, toting the same briefcase, trotted over to him. Carveco. Yes, sir, it's me. Have you reconsidered my offer to purchase the knives and join the team? George paused, searched the young man's face. Why? Did something happen to lead you to believe that? He asked. Oh, no, sir. I just wondered if a few nights pondering what might be out here in your front yard had changed your mind. Out here in my front yard. Or, I don't know, the young man showed a lopsided grin. The mailbox or something. George felt his hands form into fists. He leaned forward. Was it you? Was what me? The tarantula in my mailbox. You put it there, didn't you? Now, why would I go and do something like that? You're not denying it. The Carveco Kid slipped his smartphone from his pocket. I'll just mark you down as a maybe for the knives. George grabbed the kid's wrist. I'm not joining your scam, kid. There was silence. The Carveco Kid shook the hand off, repocketed the phone, then shifted his weight and leaned close to George. His voice was low and cold. You ever raised a tarantula, Mr. Gallo? You ever trained one? George said, of course not. I have. And you know, Mr. Gallo, when you raise creatures like these, it's essential you have something that you can easily crack their carapace in the event they just won't follow orders. That's why I like them. That's why you like tarantulas. No, these knives, the kid said. Whether it's slicing through a tarantula's exoskeleton or, say, dicing off a human being's finger, I tell you, these knives are unmatched. I pray neither of us needs to demonstrate that before you believe me. George ground his teeth, trying to think of something to say. But the Carveco Kid laughed. You want to know why I like tarantulas, though? Well, take a guess why I like them. Because they're poisonous, George said. The kid wagged a finger. Common misnomer. They're venomous. You know the difference between poisonous and venomous, don't you? Venomous, don't you? George shook his head. The young man pointed the finger at George's chest. Poisonous creatures infect their prey just by contact. May as well be poison oak leaves that can just move. He moved the finger to his own chest. Venomous creatures inject their poison into their prey. They attack, they latch on, and they don't let go. That's why I like tarantulas, because they're venomous. George made no reply as the kid leaned out of his personal space and back into his own. He made a show of spotting his watch on the wrist of the pointing hand. Is that the time? You must excuse me, Mr. Gallo. I've got an important meeting. He turned and walked to the sidewalk in front of the Gallo's house, then stopped as if he forgot something, turned and walked back. Oh, and Mr. Gallo, tarantulas can nest anywhere. Could be in your attic, could be under your couch, could be at the back of your cabinets. I can't guarantee you'll be safe from them in your time living here. Unless, of course, he raised the briefcase and patted it. You purchase some of these knives and join the team. Don't you come near me or my family, George said. I'm afraid I can't do that, Mr. Gallo. Why? It's a salesman's job to make calls on clients, Mr. Gallo. And besides, he raised both hands to mime fangs over his mouth. Don't let go, remember? All right, au revoir now. George returned to his house, now acutely aware of each and every creak and small noise he heard inside of it. He called the police to make a report of harassment, but all he could garner was a promise they would look into it. Threatening someone's safety with a tarantula was a little far-fetched. What's more, when he relayed the day's events to Angela later, she seemed more worried George had called the police. He'd spent that afternoon looking through boxes in the garage until he found his old wooden baseball bat, which he brought inside and stashed under the bed, hoping its presence would prove reassuring. But once again, he found himself staring up into the darkness of his bedroom next to his sleeping wife. His mind had gotten stuck thinking about tarantula death statistics he had been reading when he heard a noise come from the ceiling. It sounded like branches brushing against a window. His breath stopped. He waited. After another few seconds, he heard it again. He listened as it traveled from one side of the bedroom to the other, then stopped. Honey, he said, remaining still. Angela stirred. What? Listen, do you hear it? She sat up. I don't hear anything. Shh, just listen. He concentrated on the ceiling, but nothing made any sound. I heard it just now, George said. Heard what? It sounded like skittering, like a big spider. George, she said, sighing, I'm exhausted. I need to sleep. I'm serious. I heard it twice. So what? It could be a tarantula. Why would it be a tarantula? Maybe that kid, that neighbor kid. You think he put a tarantula in our attic? I don't know, George whispered. Maybe more than one. Maybe some other creature, who knows? Go back to sleep, she said. I wasn't asleep in the first place. Fine, then I'm going back to sleep. Please don't wake me up. She turned away from him on her pillow. George waited. Nothing. The skittering didn't come back. Eventually, some hours later, he did witness the sun creeping into the bedroom from the window. He hadn't even managed a moment's rest. That morning, after Angela went to work, George sat on the living room sofa staring at the Carveco pamphlet. He could no longer relax inside his home. No sooner would he ease back in a chair when a feeling like something brushing his neck would arise. The walls ticked and tapped where they didn't before. When he walked down a hallway or passed through any door, he felt a tickling on his forehead as if walking right into a spider's web. He paced around the living room. Every spot of dark coloration on the carpet or walls nearly made his heart leap out of his throat. After the gardeners and contractors went home, very small noises that punctured the suburban evening's silence sounded alarm bells in his head. George had thought of nothing but tarantulas the entire day. He thought he would need to rehearse what he would say to his wife when she got home to make it seem like that hadn't been the case. It started raining, and he watched as droplets formed webs on the front window. Eventually, he dragged himself to the bedroom and fell into an exhausted slumber. He awoke later that evening to the gentle dancing of rain outside. It was dark out. He sat up and realized Angela was home. She was washing dishes in the kitchen. He went out to say hello, but was shocked by the sight of a new addition to their kitchen counter space. Are those Carveco? Angela smiled. What do you think? I bought them from the neighbor kid on my way home today. He couldn't have been nicer about it. Angela, did you really? George, she said, dropping her tone. They're just knives. They're just knives. He dragged his feet across the kitchen tile to the sleek, opaque knife block. It looked like a cubist black hole in the process of sucking in all those new, pristine knives it housed. He turned from the knives to his wife, who continued washing dishes, her back to him. His chest tightened. His breath grew shallow. He closed his eyes and took a few deep breaths. The water splashing across the dishes seemed an extension of the weather outside. Where'd the old ones go? He managed to ask. I threw them away. I see, he said. He didn't move, looking down. He didn't breathe for a whole minute. Then, like an animatronic being brought to life, he threw his shoulders back and held his head up. Angela, I went a little too far. I let it get out of control, didn't I? She shut the water off and turned to him. Tears welled in her eyes. I'm so glad to hear you say that, Georgie. We can just move past this and you can get started again on your job search. Exactly, her husband said, embracing her. They hugged and he gently kissed the nape of her neck. Now, he said after they'd separated, why don't you let me handle dinner as recompense? He went to the new knife block and removed the butcher's knife. That would be lovely, honey. I'm going to squeeze in a shower so I have more time after dinner then. You don't mind? I don't mind, he said, the blade glinting in the kitchen light. Just let me take care of everything. He was soaked in the few seconds it took to walk from his front door to the neighbor's. He still managed to greet the old woman at the door warmly. This is a surprise, she said. Keeping the knife hidden behind his back, George fidgeted and told the woman he had a meeting with her grandson to talk about employment opportunities. She easily accepted the story and invited him inside, pointing into the staircase down to the basement where her grandson stayed. He thanked her, concealed the knife as he made his way to the stairs, then once there gripped it loosely in front of him and descended, making no attempt to mask his steps on the creaking old stairs. Carveco, he called out. It's me, old Mr. George Gallo, here to chat. The basement was dark, concrete, about the size of a two-car garage. Junk of all sorts was piled in the corners. An unmade bed lay helplessly at one end of the room. At the other, seated in front of a ratty desk too small for him, was the Carveco Kid, still in his suit. The wall above him was adorned with two clumsily nailed-in shelves, backlit by a cool neon light. On each shelf were half a dozen cages or tanks containing what George could only assume were the members of the Carveco Kid's team. The young man swiveled to look at his visitor, a neutral, if not bothered, expression on his face, an expression that soon turned to open-mouthed terror when he saw the butcher's knife in George's hand. Hey there, Mr. Gallo, what are you doing? Just wanted to thank you for helping my wife procure these beauties. You were right. I do feel they could cut through anything. George saw him look to his bed, on top of which lay the suitcase. The kid made a slight move to get up. George said, pointing the knife at him. I've already seen the pamphlets. There's no need. Sweat reflected off the kid's gelled hair in the cool neon. He turned slowly back to his desk. Then, he lurched up out of his chair to snatch a cage from the lower shelf. George froze as the young man opened the cage and shook it out onto the desktop. A brown tarantula about the size of a fist, looking very similar to the one that had been in George's mailbox, plopped out. Be careful what you do here, the young man said. Remember, I train these guys. You don't want me to, give him any orders. George crept closer to the desk, knife extended. I've been reading about nothing but all day because of you. So I know that a rodent's trained to do more than be docile to a human's touch. Oh, you some of your homework, huh? That's right. Judging by the size, coloring, and leg span of this specimen here, I'd say it's likely to be the Aphanopelma genus. Possibly a Costa Rica, maybe even a Texas tan. But given your lack of substance, I'd expect it's nothing more than a common desert tarantula. The Carveco Kid raised his hands and shrunk in his chair as George drew near. George, what are you going to do with that? Is that how you speak to your elders? Mr. Gallo, what are you going to do? I just want to correct an impression I believe you've pieced together. A false impression. You know, poison oak. I don't. Shh. It's okay. What I am. George raised the knife above the young man, held and hid his arms. The sound was curdled, a mixture of impact with the snapping of cartilage and the squish of flesh pierced. George hadn't expected him to cry out. It sounded so small, like a distant cricket's song carried on a breeze through a brisk autumn night. The Carveco Kid opened his eyes and lowered his arms. He stared with disbelief at the knife that was thrust through the tarantula into the desk. The tarantula's legs twitched slightly, then fell motionless. George stood over the young man. You could learn a thing or two from me about being venomous. The kid swallowed but said nothing. Now, George said, rubbing his hands together and clapping, where are those Carveco papers? I can't wait to sign on as part of your team. Thank you very much. That's the end.
All righty. Well, thank you so much. I'm not that desperate for part-time work, though. I'm not signing up for that team. No. Let's see. So, got our peoples here. Hello. Let's see. It's, got about 13 minutes until it becomes 9 p.m. and I turn into a pumpkin or something. Who knows what happens to me at 9.
Do you have to fill airtime? Is that what you're saying?
Stretch.
Yes.
I'm just like, oh.
I like that. Turn into a pumpkin. That turn into a pumpkin thing. I mean, what would it feel like to be a pumpkin, right?
I think I'm getting a pretty good idea with COVID. I mean, this is about as round as I've ever been. So.
Oh, you look great. Well, last time I saw you, you were hot. So what can I say?
No, oh, okay. Thank you.
No.
That was fairly recently.
Thank you so much. Oh my God, Tom, Jeff, beautiful work. We have read together before on and
yeah,
I loved your story about the haunted dress. So great.
You broke the.
Sorry, I was like, my technology is kind of.
Yeah, well, it's probably haunted too. That's just that time of year.
You're really good at voices there, Tom. He was sounding a little like Dirty Harry there at the end. Had a very Clint Eastwood vibe going on.
Thank you. I am trying to hide the fact that I think the voices can help give something maybe I didn't write into the story.
Sure. Take whatever you can get.
Yeah. I figured it's a bit of a performance.
No, I love this bit. It's like we're doing, it's very old time, this radio show kind of thing that was very popular before we had all of this like crazy technology. Like decades ago, people would just listen to stories on the radio, and it doesn't really matter what you see; it matters what you hear. And you guys are so fantastic. I loved it. I love TV too. All of it. I love being here tonight. I was listening to every word. You guys, you captivated me.
Thank you. Everyone did amazing. Katie was amazing. Jeff as well. Amy, I was going to say you broke our streak of creatures because I also had a creature story.
Yeah.
Sea monkeys and Wendigo.
Yeah, we had a lot of creatures tonight, which is good, but
spooky. Yeah.
Yeah, still
Spooky.
supernatural, but not a creature. So, yeah, well, have to mix it up. We just, I guess, all got the call or whatever. It's just everybody now.
Well, as always, to echo Roseanna. Thank you very much for organizing it, Amy, and and allowing us to do this, because it is wonderful to get to hear your guys' stories and read with you.
It's kind of
but technology does help us now be able to do this during a pandemic, which is also cool.
Yeah.
Well, and we're all in different spots. Well, I'm in Denver. Aurora, where are you in Denver, Jeff, or are you?
Colorado Springs.
Oh, you're down in Colorado Springs. Okay. So Roseanna, you're in Denver. And Tom,
I'm in Orange County.
Yeah. And
really? I didn't know that. It's got a real just poetry reading vibe to it, like
rare.
Hanging out in Brooklyn at a bar doing a poetry reading is what it reminds me of.
Yeah.
Or like a San Francisco thing.
Yeah.
Yeah,
exactly. I like it when we can talk to each other like this. This is cool. This part right here. We're all here.
Exactly.
You guys are so fantastic. I learned so much by listening. That's the way all of us are. All of us that are, like right here tonight. I think it's safe to say that we have all learned from listening and reading. Like we just soak it all up. We soak it up. We soak it up. We soak it up. Amy, there's no end to how much we can soak up, right? So you just keep putting this out every month, and it's great.
Yeah. Well,
when's the next one happening, Amy?
The next one is happening on, I believe it's October 20th. Let me just make sure. Yes. So that's the third Wednesday. So, and we'll have Shannon Lawrence at that one. The theme is Beyond Your Philosophy. So, which is just basically, me being cute because I was like, there's that line from Hamlet that, there are more things in heaven and earth than ever dreamt of in your philosophy, Horatio. So, that's the...
Classing up the joint with it.
Classing up the joint for sure.
I so class up the joint.
Yeah, right?
So,
great.
Yeah. It should be fun. Lots of spooky stuff there too. I mean, I know we have one new reader who's joining us named Bess, and she's very literary, but she has told me specifically that her story will not be scary. So at least that'll be like the pickled ginger in the mix for everybody. But yeah, sure.
It's always good to get new readers in. And to see
I love it. I love you, right? I love you writers. I love you writers, Jeff, Tom, that write spooky stuff. Like that's not my, I don't know how to do that. So I was dissecting your writing tonight. I'll just tell you right now. I was listening to every word that you read and totally paying attention to how you were making that work.
Oh, that's cool.
And you were totally making that work. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And I like the weirdness, Jeff, of yours. I think is of a Ray Bradbury type.
Oh, sea monkeys.
It might have been a little too weird, but yeah.
No, I think you got to go there.
Well, yeah. But, plus, a lot of that's true. Like Patterson Air Force Base really did poison the groundwater here. So
was the inventor really?
Well, it was really cool
premises.
to me.
Yeah, he really was.
Oh man,
Jeff, because We used to buy those little sea monkeys in packets. We bought them. We bought them like at the bubblegum machine when I was a kid. Like we bought that stuff and we took it home and we poured it into a fishbowl with water and we tried to make sea monkeys happen. And we did the same thing you were talking about in the story. We were just pouring down the toilet because they were like, not happening. But my brothers and I would be there with a magnifying glass. We'd be like, wait, I think I see one. I think I see one. And they're so. Wait a minute. Plug in. No, actually, no. That was so cool. That was a really cool story. Both of you.
Well, thank you. Appreciate
and
that.
Amy, stories were really great. And Katie. Yeah. I hope you appreciated what I brought to the table.
Oh, absolutely.
I have a little different spin on things. I'm a live performer and I'm a hybrid. And I'm a like multi-dynamic performer with the writing, so I like to weave things together and have some little tiny short things and some really long things and everything in between. But I was really happy to share those pieces that I shared tonight. So thanks for listening, everyone in the public.
Yes.
And actually, Amy, so talk to us right now about Stories Live on YouTube channel and stuff. I want to know more about that.
Oh, so a little something about the show.
Not YouTube. I mean Facebook. Not Facebook. Facebook, YouTube.
Oh, Facebook.
Ah! No, you have a channel on YouTube, right?
Yes, we have the
But you have a
channel on YouTube.
Also.
So yeah, we've got the YouTube channel, and then we have the Facebook group, which is just let's see, I think it's just facebook.com/groups/stories live. And so we just, broadcast to both Facebook and YouTube, just, depending on like what people's preferences are. I mean, I think that most people watch this on YouTube just because you can get YouTube on the smart TV and stuff. But, and then on the Facebook community, we just kind of, like that's often where I do like, calls for readers and just, post announcements about contests that are coming up or like scholarship opportunities for writers. Like there's a scholarship for this ridiculously expensive intensive workshop conference thing called Superstars that's going to be in Colorado Springs. I think it's next February. I'm not sure, but I don't know. It's usually way more expensive than something I would consider going to. But it's like, hey, if you do sci-fi, especially, it's a great opportunity to go and do that. So, and especially anyone who wants a scholarship to go and do that. But yeah.
I think everything that you do to provide storytelling, I think that's the big part of it, is the storytelling. Like that one word, storytelling. Like that's really, really cool for people in general, because storytelling has been a very important part of our human existence forever. No matter who or where or when, we need it. So that's a very beautiful way to keep the storytelling alive and making it available.
Yeah, exactly.
Well said. I think that is a great bow on this broadcast.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I agree. So yeah, I mean, it's about pumpkin time for me. And also my office is like the hottest part of the house. I'm not sure what that's about, but anyway, I will let everybody go. Have a good night. Have a great week, and I'll see,
Good night.
hopefully, everyone back in one way or another in about a month. So
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right.
Adios. All right. Okay, well, that's a wrap. And yeah, see you back here on October 20th. And yeah, we'll have Shannon Lawrence, Best Mayor, and more people to be announced. So, and I do have our Facebook group link in the chat. Well, not the chat exactly. It's the comments section on here, but it is facebook.com/groups/stories live. You could also search for Stories Live on Facebook and you can find the group if you want to join there. So yeah, meanwhile, if you like the broadcast, be sure to subscribe and also give the video a like. So see you soon. Bye-bye.